CBS News has confirmed that President Trump has accepted the resignation of UN Ambassador Nikki Haley. This happened this morning, and we are waiting for a live event from the Oval Office where President Trump and Nikki Haley are reported to speak, and we will bring that to you live. The timing of this is all very unclear, but joining me now to discuss this is CBSN political reporter Katelyn Byrnes. Katelyn, there's always a lot of speculation around the Trump White House, who's coming, who's going. This was not something that seems as it was expected.
Exactly. This is very surprising news in Washington, particularly since Nikki Haley has been with the Trump administration from the beginning, and she's been able to kind of enjoy something in her post that others in the administrations aren't able to, which is that she's been in New York, so as UN ambassador, so she is able to be kind of inoculated in some ways from all of the drama and seeming chaos going on in Washington. Now, she released a statement a couple of weeks ago before the UN General Assembly in which she was very critical of Russia, saying that they've been undermining enforcement of sanctions on North Korea. So she's been vocal about that. Remember, Pompeo, Secretary of State Pompeo, is returning from North Korea, having those meetings. It's also very interesting to consider Haley in terms of her involvement in politics and in the Republican Party. She's long been considered a Republican Party rising star. She was very critical of Donald Trump throughout the 2016 election. She endorsed Rubio, and she gave the Republican response to President Obama's final State of the Union in 2016, in which she was very critical of the then candidate Trump and his rhetoric, slamming against division. She's, of course, the daughter of immigrants. So she's very much played that up. And so when she took this job as UN ambassador, it was surprising to some because of her history with Trump, but they had made amends, and she had been saying that she was supportive of him when she needed to be, and she wasn't afraid to also voice her criticisms of him.
So, Katelyn, President Trump has tweeted out a big announcement with my friend Nikki Haley. So when you look at that type of wording, there are questions swirling. Will she be reassigned? She declined to comment when she was asked that by a Reuters reporter on the way into the White House. But as you mentioned, their relationship over the years has been tumultuous, and then they've come together. So it would be very interesting to see if she is reassigned or if something happened at the UN.
Right. Well, it is very interesting that they are coming to make this announcement together, it seems, present at the White House as well, and the White House confirming this information and saying that they will be talking more about it in just about 10 minutes or so. Nikki Haley was talked about as a potential Secretary of State, just given her perch at the UN and given the experience that she has been collecting in that post. Of course, after Rex Tillerson resigned, the president chose Mike Pompeo, who was the former CIA director, to fill that Secretary of State post, and he and the president enjoy a very good relationship, and they're on good terms. So will be interesting to see whether Nikki Haley might be reassigned, how this decision was reached, whether in fact it was mutual. We still have a lot of questions going into this. This is big news, though, however, because when you talk to people who are not supportive of the president but are in Republican politics, they often point to Nikki Haley as something of a bright light. They point to Nikki Haley and James Mattis, the defense secretary, as kind of the people in the administration who are kind of keeping a lot of things together. And so she does enjoy a lot of support, and some bipartisan support, quite frankly. And again, given that she's been here in New York, given that she has been removed from the chaos in Washington at the UN, she has enjoyed some very positive ratings.
How do you think she would do? I mean, pure speculation here, if she was moved to Washington, D.C. and worked more closely with President Trump, because looking at their history, it's been up and down.
It has been up and down. Remember a couple of months ago when that anonymous op-ed was published in the New York Times from a White House or administration official criticizing the president, Nikki Haley released her own editorial in the Washington Post saying, denying that it was her and saying that if she did have problems with the president, she expresses them to him directly and to the administration. And she called that op-ed very dangerous in terms of what it was doing, that New York Times op-ed. And so she has carved out her own brand, really, in this administration. Now, she was governor of South Carolina, a popular governor, and she made a lot of news in 2016 for calling for the Confederate flag to be removed from State House grounds. That was a cultural touchstone moment in the country. She received a lot of support for that decision, and it was a risky decision, just given the history in South Carolina. And so she kind of has been rising on the national stage, and so we'll see what's next for her.
First Indian American to hold office in the state of South Carolina. She has definitely made history in her political history. Something that's interesting is, when we look at the timing of this, yesterday we were just talking about President Trump and Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein and how there were rumors circulating that he was going to be fired. And we discussed it, that a lot of people may have been advising the president, say, hey, we're only 28 days away from the midterms. Let's keep everything, smooth sailing as we go forward. So a lot of Republicans are saying that they've received this energy boost and the base has been reignited. So since you call her, a shining star in the Republican Party, and she's can cross across both parties, would this be maybe a political move to just kind of get some more energy if she is reassigned?
It's a good question, and it all really depends on what happens next for her and what is surrounding this resignation and what that relationship is in fact like as she departs from the administration, as she is planning to do, reportedly. So what's very interesting to consider is that with Rod Rosenstein, if Trump were to fire him, there would be a real negative reaction, not only among Republicans and Democrats, but among the public, because it would signal speak to the more chaotic elements of this administration, given that Rosenstein oversees the Russia probe, and that would introduce a host of issues for this president, both legally and in terms of politics. So we're waiting to see what exactly Nikki Haley is going to do and what exactly are the facts surrounding this resignation. I think could help inform us about what kind of impact this could have in the future.
We do know that we are getting closer. We are waiting a live event from the Oval Office at 10:30 Eastern Standard Time with President Trump and UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, who has resigned. President Trump accepted her resignation earlier today. We do know that the press pool has been moved into the Oval Office, and that event is expected to take place at 10:30. Again, UN Ambassador Nikki Haley has resigned, and we are covering this. We're going to bring you that event live. We're talking with our CBSN political reporter, Katelyn Byrnes, who's been covering this administration and, looking at Nikki Haley. We know there's a lot of positive attributes that we have talked about. Has she been under the microscope for anything else that has been swirling around?
Well, she has been, unlike the president, she's been very critical of Russia. She's been also very outspoken when she does disagree with the administration on the way forward when it comes to foreign policy. And she's really, again, carved out an identity for herself, kind of separate of the Trump White House, which has been kind of how she has been able to succeed, really, and kind of garner positive support. There are questions, I would imagine, about that relationship, about those differences as it relates to this post. Remember, the president was just here a couple of weeks ago speaking to the UN General Assembly, and that's really Nikki Haley's bread and butter, of course, given her post at the UN. So I am wondering if there had been conversations then, if there are conversations about their differences as it relates to foreign policy, especially as the president prepares to continue this open relationship and dialogue with North Korea. Pompeo, of course, just meeting with Korean leader Kim Jong-un just this week and returning from that trip. So keeping an eye on whether this is about those differences, whether they are not able to get on the same page, or whether she is being moved to another position, or whether this was a split that was mutually agreed upon.
So many questions. Fascinating to watch and wait, to hear exactly what is happening. But we do know that President Trump tweeted out, "Big announcement with my friend," and I think that's interesting wording there, because there's always speculation that maybe something went wrong. But again, big announcement with my friend Ambassador Nikki Haley in the Oval Office at 10:30 a.m. We're just about a minute and a half away from that. We do know that the press pool has gathered in the Oval Office to hear from both of them. There has been speculation that maybe Nikki Haley has been reassigned. She declined to comment as she walked into the Oval Office. You know, Katelyn, what does history show us in terms of a UN ambassador post? How long do they typically stay? Do they stay the whole term?
Well, it is an interesting position because, again, you're not in Washington, you're here in New York, so that gives you some kind of autonomy. And it is a chance for someone like Nikki Haley, who was coming as a governor, was very a long time a political figure. Now this position has allowed her to accumulate foreign policy experience and experience that she would have not otherwise had as governor of South Carolina. So it's seen in some ways as perhaps a launching pad for higher office, which is why lots of folks kind of speculated at the beginning that she had her eyes on bigger ambitions beyond the UN. It can be really a launching pad for higher office if she indeed chose to do so. There was speculation, of course, last year when the president was feuding with Rex Tillerson privately that Nikki Haley might be someone who would assume that role and that might give her a bigger platform. He, of course, chose Mike Pompeo, the former CIA director, who has a great relationship with the president, and the president speaks very highly of him. You do know that language, though, that the president has been using to describe Nikki Haley as my friend, the fact that this is kind of seeming to be a formal rollout, first reported by Axios and now confirmed. The White House expected to talk in a couple of minutes here and explain more about the decision-making process.
That's right. It is 10:30 Eastern Standard Time, and we are awaiting an announcement from President Trump from the Oval Office with UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, who has resigned, really sending shockwaves throughout the political world this morning. It doesn't seem as if that was expected at all. Katelyn, you mentioned that she just recently wrote that rebuttal to the anonymous op-ed, and I just want to read a little bit of that as we are waiting for this announcement from the Oval Office. And Nikki Haley wrote in there that the author might think he or she is doing a service to the country. I strongly disagree. What this senior official in the Trump administration has done and is apparently intent on continuing to do is a serious disservice, not just to the president, but to the country. She went on to write, I, too, am a senior Trump administration official. I proudly serve in this administration, and I enthusiastically support most of its decisions and the direction it is taking the country. So reading that, this seems as if it was going to be the last thing we were going to be discussing today.
Right, exactly. But also, you know, what was really interesting about when that New York Times op-ed came out, everyone in the White House and outside of it was playing the speculation game, trying to find who was the writer of that op-ed. You had many administration officials, including the vice president, have to come out and say that it wasn't them. And so Nikki Haley's rebuttal, that published rebuttal, was really remarkable and making clear, she was trying to make clear that it wasn't her, and that she said that while she does have serious disagreements with the president, she voices them to him directly, and she called that New York Times op-ed something of a dangerous endeavor to go down that route. What is very interesting, though, is that a lot of Republicans have had their eye on Nikki Haley. Before Donald Trump kind of came into force, she was considered a potential presidential candidate herself. Her endorsement in the 2016 presidential primary on the Republican side was among the most coveted because she did kind of represent that new Republican brand, that more inclusive and diverse Republican brand that the party was selling, of course, before 2016 or trying to sell. She endorsed Marco Rubio in South Carolina, and that was considered something of a launching point for him, but we know how that turned out. The party decided to go the other way. Haley had been very critical of Donald Trump and his rhetoric throughout the 2016 campaign. They made amends after his election, and of course she was appointed to this post. And this post was seen as a real opportunity for her, not only to accrue foreign policy experience and more experience on kind of a national stage, and also perhaps giving her a platform for a presidential run down the road or some higher office, in addition to her experience as 2 terms of South Carolina governor.
You bring up a fascinating point, her ambition for higher office. We have seen, different hints at that. How would you see that playing out, and would you expect her to challenge President Trump going forward, or how would that play out?
There are a lot of never Trumpers, as we call them, who would like to see some kind of challenge. On paper, it would seem that the president would be ripe for an intra-party challenge, given his unpopularity nationally, but he is very popular among Republicans and still remains so. And any challenge among Republicans would really be in vain at this point. And so it's not clear whether she would wage that, although lots of folks in the Republican Party who do not like Trump, do not like his style, point to her as a bright spot in the administration, and the fact that she has stayed from the beginning when we've seen so many departures in this White House. Her staying in that position was pretty much an anomaly. Her, James Mattis, of course, the Secretary of Defense, is still there, and a couple of others, but that we have seen so many departures in this White House. Now, we are approaching a midterm, and there typically in administrations, people start to reevaluate their positions. It really depends. We'll see whether the president faces serious political consequences in November for some of the things that he has done and said. We're still kind of keeping an eye on that. But this is really big news coming from Washington, just given that we have been watching her really come into this position and define herself and carve out her own identity in this post.
Let's just bring everybody up to speed. We are following breaking news out of Washington, D.C. UN Ambassador Nikki Haley has resigned. We are waiting for a live event out of the Oval Office any minute now. We are expecting to hear from President Trump and Nikki Haley from the Oval Office. It was scheduled at 10:30. It is now 10:35 Eastern Standard Time. President Trump tweeting out just a short time ago, big announcement with my friend UN Ambassador Nikki Haley at 10:30 out of the Oval Office. Again, as Katelyn Byrnes is reporting right now, this is big news coming out of Washington. A lot of unanswered questions. Has she been reassigned? Was she asked to resign? Did this take the president off guard? When did she make this decision? So many unanswered questions. We do know that the press pool is waiting in the Oval Office, ready to answer so many of those questions. Katelyn, just looking at possible replacements, who would come up in your mind?
It's a good question, especially how critical this role has been. Remember, just a few weeks ago, the president was in New York for the United Nations General Assembly, and Nikki Haley has been kind of at the forefront of that, of course, given this role. So there is a big question about who would fill that position, especially given the items at hand, North Korea, of course, being front and center at this point. The other question I have, too, is whether she is, in fact, reassigned or whether she is leaving, whether she becomes active on the midterm campaign trail, given that she is, if she's not reassigned, that she could be free to do that. Of course, she is really beloved by Republicans. She and Lindsey Graham, the senator from South Carolina, are very close, given they share a home state and have worked closely together. Of course, Graham, being a key ally of the president, has emerged as his top ally in the Senate at this point. So I'm very interested to see the way in which the president views this and how they came to this decision.
All right. Well, as we wait for this announcement from the Oval Office with President Trump and Nikki Haley, we want to bring in our CBS News State Department reporter Kylie Atwood, who is joining us now with this news. Kylie, your reaction? What are you hearing?
Well, I've been making calls for the past 15 minutes since this news broke, and shockingly, none of Haley's aides are answering the phone. But one of the things that I think is actually really important to note is that though Nikki Haley came in and has been a consistent supporter of President Trump throughout, a lot of the people that I'm calling today are folks that have been working with Nikki Haley since she was the governor of South Carolina. Her top policy person, who's based here in Washington, D.C., was a pollster with her working in South Carolina. A lot of her top aides who have been working with her at the United Nations in New York came with her from South Carolina as well. So even though she was a big part of this administration, she definitely had her own little group of people that were very close to her, and it was hard to find out what was happening within the smallness of that group.
And we just want to remind our viewers that we are waiting for this announcement out of the Oval Office at 10:30. We're a little past that now. Kylie Atwood is following this story with us out of the State Department, and Katelyn Byrnes is here on set with me, a CBSN political reporter. We're also just looking up, Nikki Haley was on Face the Nation on September 23rd, and just kind of looking over her transcript here, Katelyn, right now, I'm just looking to see if there was anything that might have hinted at this. She discussed with John Dickerson different topics. And as I go through this and just look at this transcript, just go over the relationship and the history with President Trump. It's been on again, off again, and how they've come together.
Yes, it has been an on again, off again relationship. Indeed, during 2016, she was a key critic of him. She was an ally of Jeb Bush, given that they both served as governor. She spoke with him. She ended up endorsing Marco Rubio, the Florida senator, in that Republican primary, that very crowded Republican primary. And when she gave that endorsement, it was seen as a big boost in South Carolina to Rubio. Of course, Trump ended up taking that state. But what was very interesting about Haley was that she wasn't afraid to be critical of then candidate Trump. She criticized his rhetoric. She gave a response. She was tapped by Republicans to give a response to then President Obama's final State of the Union in 2016. And she really evoked her immigrant history, her parents, of course. She really was critical, without naming Trump, of the rhetoric that he was espousing. And she tried to strike a more conciliatory tone and a more inclusive tone in that speech. And that was something, in that rebuttal, and that was something that a lot of folks had their eye on at the time. Of course, Trump won the nomination, won the election, and Haley joined his administration. She has since said, and Kylie can speak to this more directly, she has said in that Washington Post op-ed that she is opposes the president or voices her concerns when she needs to, and joins him when she feels that is correct. She has been inoculated in some respects from the drama going on in Washington, given her perch here in New York, and that has helped, I think, has helped her in this position, but also she is still very popular among the general public, when many folks associated with the administration are not.
Kylie, weigh in on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, Haley through and through has been the one who said when she has problems with the president, she takes him on directly. So she has been an advocate for a lot of his policies. And when she doesn't agree, she marches into the White House, to the Oval Office, to tell him that. A few things that she has been an advocate for with this administration. Number one was moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem in Israel. She was a big proponent of that. And since that has happened, she has been the one to face the blowback on the world stage at the UN, because most countries didn't agree with the U.S. in that decision. And she has also been the one to take that a bit personally. Much like the president, some of the criticism that she receives goes deep with her. And so as we have seen this administration pull back its aid from UNRWA, which is a UN organization that provides support to Palestinian refugees. That's something that Nikki Haley was very supportive of, because the Palestinians treated the U.S. with such frustration, with such anger after they moved the Israel embassy. And so there have been a lot of these issues where, Haley has been the leading voice, and she's not afraid to get out there and be vocal about it. She actually was the one at one point who said that the Trump administration was going to be putting new sanctions on Russia, and then they didn't do it. And she said, I wasn't wrong. This was a point of conflict in the White House. There was some confusion there, but I knew exactly what I was doing. This is not someone who has ever stepped back from what she believes is right and from the policies that she's advocating for. I also want to point out that she had a very frosty relationship with the first Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson. They did not get along. She would come to Washington. She wouldn't even tell Rex Tillerson's staff that she was here. It was sort of like they had this competition for power. Who was the one who was the leading voice for foreign policy for the Trump administration? And she felt that she had a closer relationship with Trump. Tillerson didn't see a need to really develop a relationship with Nikki Haley.
Right,
and
Kylie, let me just interrupt you just for a moment because we're starting to get some reports from a pool reporter in the Oval Office, and we're told that Mr. Trump said Nikki Haley has been very special to me. She's done an incredible job, fantastic person. She gets it. She's been at the UN since the beginning. She told me 6 months ago, maybe at the end of the year, she wants to take a break. Was governor, this perhaps even more intense. I'm reading off some rough notes here. He also mentioned that North Korea is moving along well. Pompeo thinks the world of her. All happy for you, but hate to lose you. At the end of the year, she will be leaving. We'll be in constant touch. So we're getting some new details about UN Ambassador Nikki Haley's resignation. We do know that she will be leaving at the end of the year. We do not know what's next for her. Has she been reassigned? And who her possible replacement will be. Kylie, I didn't mean to cut you off, but go ahead on to your thought.
No, I mean, those comments are pretty nondescript, right?
Right.
They say that she's leaving. They're not saying why. They're not pointing to any bad blood between the White House and Nikki Haley. They're saying that she has a good relationship with Pompeo. As I was saying, her relationship with Rex Tillerson, the previous Secretary of State, wasn't that great. So she's walking out the door in good standing with this president, it seems. We're going to have to get down to the bottom of why she's choosing to walk out the door.